We talk a ton of SEC football with Chris Phillips from SEC Unfiltered in his debut trip to the show.
You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks again for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast, including YouTube. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Hello, I'm Steven Willis, host of the Locked On Ole Miss podcast, and he is Chris Phillips from SEC Unfiltered, making his debut appearance on the Locked On Ole Miss podcast. How you doing, Chris?
Steven, I appreciate you having me on, man. I'm doing well. It's an exciting time of year. Obviously, I know the college football season has come to a close for 2024, but you know as well as I do, man, spring ball is going to be here before you know it, and it never really stops. Basketball's heating up, obviously. We got March Madness around the corner, and just a week and a half or so away from opening day. Actually, it's funny enough, Steven, I'll be seeing Ole Miss on opening weekend. We'll be announcing here shortly on social media. We are going to Arlington for that tournament there. Ole Miss will be playing in, so I'll get a firsthand look at the Rebels and Mike Bianco on opening weekend. Excited to see what they do, but now I appreciate you having me on, man. Excited to chat.
Yeah, the first time that they've had a pitching coach that's actually in charge of what's going on. So Ole Miss fans are going to be very interesting in what they do in Arlington with that. I think it was Joel Mangrum, came from the Cleveland Guardians organization. So should be pretty interesting indeed. Listen, we're already talking about the 2025 football season. Basketball's here. Baseball's getting ready to start. But I imagine that Unfiltered is going through the same thing that all of us are going through, and that is at this period of time, it's kind of a content view cliff. I mean, it just like you can count on the fact that 30 to 70% of your views just evaporates after football season.
Yeah, we try to stay on top of it. I mean, it's never too early to look ahead, right? So we're already talking about we'll do different series over the course of the offseason. Right now, we've already started one looking ahead to 2025. What are the three biggest question marks we have for every team going in 2025? And we'll do stuff like that, like I said, throughout the spring, the summer. We'll have guests on like yourself. We'll talk about it. So like you said, it never really stops. And I think right now, what we've seen, certainly month of January, everybody's kind of catching their breath, transitioning into baseball and basketball. But again, like we mentioned, it never sleeps, man. And I think it's never too early to look ahead. It's never too early to talk about it. And I mean, like I said, it's crazy to think, but I mean, spring ball is going to be here before you know it, just a few weeks, and spring games are beginning of April. That's really not that far away when you think about the fact that February is a short month. So it's always exciting. It's never too early to project. And I know these rosters will still change, obviously, but a lot of them out there, we've kind of got the core of what they're going to be, and, excited to see how it shakes out.
Interesting to get your opinion on this. I consider basically the way that roster construction happens right now, the early signing period in December and the early transfer portal window that goes through basically January while they're doing that. That's like 90 to 95% of the roster construction, and it's probably 100% of the players that are actually going to contribute next season.
Yeah, and I think to your point, Steven, you mentioned kind of the cliff in regards to views. I think that's one of the reasons. I forgot to mention, too, this was traditionally the week that we had National Signing Day. And it's still technically a signing day, but early signing day has all but taken over as the official National Signing Day. And, I mean, to your point, the way that the transfer portal and NIL has impacted the game, I think most fans kind of, for lack of a better way of putting it, kind of check out and say, hey, just let me know who's on the roster when we get to spring ball, or let me know who's on the roster when we get to the summer or fall camp or the first game. So, I mean, listen, Lane Kiffin and company, he's made it really fun to follow Ole Miss when it comes to what they do in the portal. I mean, nobody's done it better than them, I feel like, over the last couple of years. I know last year I was calling him the portal king. And again, I think when you look at the work they've done in the transfer portal, I think that's a fair title. So, but yeah, to your point, it makes it really hard to keep up with folks like yourself and others that, we've done a good job, I think, of staying on top of it as well. But it makes us really valuable, I think, with helping folks really keep up with it, because it's man, you show up to the spring game and they hand you that paper roster and you're like, all right, I got to get myself familiar because there's been so much movement. And then even after the spring game, there's going to be guys that transfer too. So, I mean, it's, you're only as good, I think, in today's college football, Steven, as your collective and your NIL and essentially your resources in helping you acquire talent and build out your roster.
And Ole Miss fans have to wait until basically August or September to do it because their spring game is a hot dog eating contest. So
Which I think more teams are going to go that direction, though. I mean, we saw Matt Rule talking about, maybe no spring game. And listen, I mean, Steven, it's just if there's anybody out there that pushes back and says, no way, that's impossible, won't happen. I mean, if you'd have told me 10 years ago that, like, the Orange Bowl wouldn't matter or that bowl games wouldn't matter, I'd have said you were crazy. If you would have told me that, fan appreciation days would essentially go away, I don't think that's really a thing anymore. So when you really think about it in today's college football, it is kind of like, why would I showcase all of my talent for a national TV audience because everybody can stream it? Why would I do that for other teams and coaches to essentially get a free scout day and be able to, maybe we've got a guy that we know is going to be a special player but hasn't burst on the scene yet. And all of a sudden he shows flashes in the spring game and he's getting calls and offers from all different schools. So I hate to think about it, but I mean, I think what Ole Miss did last year and probably is going to continue to do, that might become more of the reality where it is kind of more of a fan appreciation day, but it's not some, it's not like an official game or a game at all. So it's just the college football world's ever changing, man.
Well, you have a situation where the spring transfer portal window just needs to go away.
I would agree. Yeah, the calendar's got to get fixed. There's no question.
Yeah. And once you have that, the spring games and all the national TV and all the tampering that happens, it doesn't matter because it's after the season ends anyway. Mm-hmm. So
I mean they've got to continue to work on the calendar. I think they're making strides, but we got a long way to go.
So what's you guys' view of the SEC in 2025? What's the storylines that you're going to be keeping track of?
Yeah, I mean, Steven, I think there's obviously a lot of them, and we're months away. But to your point, it never stops. I mean, I first start with Alabama. They just bring on Ryan Grubb as offensive coordinator. I was at their bowl game down in Tampa when they lost to Michigan, and the Jalen Milroe era came to an end in Tuscaloosa. I think a lot of fans were not all that sad about that. Who's going to be the starting quarterback? I think it's probably going to be Ty Simpson from folks I've talked to, but they've got the kid Keelan Russell, the youngster Austin
I think
Mack
it's going to be Russell.
And it very well could be for sure. But I think that's going to be the big question for them because I think, Steven, looking at their roster, they should be a playoff team in 2025. I really believe that. And I think Kalen DeBoer is a good coach, but I think it was a rocky year one, obviously, in Tuscaloosa following up Nick Saban. But you look at their roster, all they've got coming back. Can Alabama get back to the college football playoff? I think that's obviously a huge story. Can Texas, with Arch Manning? I mean, Arch Manning is going to be the hot button topic, right? I mean, you were talking about views. If you want to generate views, put Arch Manning in the title and put him on a thumbnail. You're probably going to do that. So he's going to be a guy that we talk about a lot over the offseason. Texas is going to be a team we talk about a lot over the offseason. Can they repeat, get back to Atlanta for the SEC championship and get back, obviously, in the college ball playoff? We got new quarterbacks. I mentioned Bama. I mentioned Texas. How about Georgia with Gunner Stockton? His first full year as the starter. Georgia loses a lot defensively as well. I look at LSU. It's a really, really big year for Brian Kelly. Obviously, Garrett Nussmeier back at quarterback. Can they finally win a season opener, open it up at Clemson, which I think is one of the best games in week one outside of probably that Texas-Ohio State game and some others as well. It's an electric slate in the SEC in week one. But LSU, can they get to double-digit wins? I mean, listen, Steven, you know this. Y'all know LSU very well. 9-3 gets you fired in Baton Rouge. So another 9-3 or 8-4. And, I don't know if they're going to pay the $60 million buyout, but you'd be surprised how quickly a team can find $60 million, or a fan base, if you will, if they really want to. So
yeah, especially when you have Our Lady of the Lake right there.
Yeah, exactly. So LSU is another big storyline. I mean, Ole Miss is a big one. I can't help but think, Steven, after missing the college football playoff last year, after everybody thought they would go and going into 2025, I love Austin Simmons at quarterback. I saw him firsthand when I went down there for the Ole Miss Georgia game, and he came in for that one drive, and I was super impressed with just his moxie and his composure, and obviously his arm talent and what he can do from a mobility standpoint. Caden Lee obviously being back as well. You added Haas out of the portal. You've added some defensive pieces. I can't help but think, I'm like, wouldn't it be ironic if Ole Miss went to the playoff this year instead of last year? It was like everybody was heaping all the expectations. If they go less than 11-1, it's a bad year, and obviously we know what happened. I think continuing to monitor Lane Kiffin, he's always going to be a storyline. His teams are always going to be a storyline as well. I mean, you look throughout the rest of the SEC, Stephen. Again, I know I'm being long-winded, but there's just so many storylines. Can teams like Oklahoma, Auburn, can they have bounce-back seasons from really, really disappointing campaigns? They've obviously swapped quarterbacks with Arnold going over to Auburn. Big year for Hugh Freeze. How about the coaches on the hot seat, Stephen? I mean, that's another big one. We didn't have any coaches fired, leave, anything, I think the floodgates could open in 2025 with guys like Brent Venables at OU, Hugh Freeze at Auburn, Sam Pittman at Arkansas.
Brian Kelly.
Brian Kelly at LSU is certainly one. I think you could see, Mark Stoops at Kentucky if they really want to make a move. So there's a number of coaches. Billy Napier at Florida, I didn't even mention. I think his seat, even after a successful 24, is still pretty hot. How about South Carolina being a dark horse college football playoff contender with Lenore Sellers? Can they be that? Will they take a step back? That's going to be fascinating. And then finally, how about Diego Pavia over at Vanderbilt? Can they play spoiler again and get to a bowl game back-to-back year? So anyway, Steven, I know that was a long-winded answer, but there's just so many storylines, and already looking ahead, I'm already fired up with the 25 season.
Yeah, the 25 season should be fun. And you mentioned Austin Simmons. There's a little bit of T. Martin in the preview for Ole Miss this year. There really is.
Yeah, I like Austin Simmons a lot, man. Like I said, I saw him. We got to see him kind of in garbage time early in the season, and you knew. And also, by the way, I'm a fellow Southpaw, so automatically I like seeing Austin Simmons play the lefty quarterback. But yeah, seeing him in person against Georgia, I thought that was a huge moment in that game when he came in. I think Georgia had just scored the opening touchdown off the turnover, the Jackson Dart tip ball pick, whatever, gone up 7-0. That was a point in that game where it's like, man, if he comes in and he's rattled and makes a mistake, things could get sideways, because if Georgia gets up 2 scores, who knows what happens the rest of the way. But, man, he just marches them right down the field. He threw some dimes on that drive, and they scored the touchdown. And it was on from there, right? A historic day for Ole Miss. But, yeah, I like his game a lot. And, again, Caden Lee coming back as top target, I think, is a big deal. So, yeah, I think that Simmons is probably going to be a guy, Steven, he's probably ranked middle of the pack-ish when it comes to quarterbacks going into 2025, but I think if he reaches his ceiling, he could be a top, 3 or 4 quarterback at worst in the conference.
Whenever we come back, we're going to talk to Chris more about Austin Simmons and compare him a little bit against Arch Manning. So we'll talk about that, look at his players to watch this season, and what are SEC Unfiltered's plans for the football season. So stick around for that. I do want to let you know that Super Bowl 59 is here. 1 game, 2 teams, and endless possibilities. And there's no better way to make your play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. Whether it's predicting the first touchdown, calling the MVP, or even betting on the coin toss, FanDuel makes it easy to get in on the action. With live betting all game long, you can adjust your bets as the game unfolds and feel the thrill from kickoff to the final whistle. The live betting feature lets you stay involved no matter what happens on the field, and the app is super easy to navigate. Plus, knowing that you can place a $5 bet and potentially win $200 in bonus bets for the Super Bowl, yeah, that's icing on the cake. So download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets from FanDuel. That's FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel. It's the official partner of Super Bowl 59. All right, Chris Phillips from SEC Unfiltered is joining us today, and I just want to bring this up because you saw the drive with Austin Simmons going against that Georgia defense. Earlier in the season, there was a problem with Quinn Ewers, and they put Arch Manning on the field against that same defense. It was a home game in both situations. Arch kind of looked lost, kind of looked overwhelmed in that moment, and like you said, Austin Simmons just led them directly down the field. Does that influence a little bit your top 16 of quarterbacks? Because everybody's going to automatically put Arch number 1. But whenever you see that comparison, what does that make you think?
I think what it makes me think is that people need to keep realistic expectations for Arch Manning. It says more to me about Arch than probably Austin. It says a lot about Austin Simmons, but I think what it says again is that Arch Manning, I'm not going to have him going into the 2025 season. I will not have Arch Manning number 1. I think that from a hype perspective and a name perspective and a notoriety perspective, Arch Manning would be 1, but he's got to prove it on the field. The guy, and he's got all the potential in the world. From people I've talked to down there in Austin, they talk about his football IQ, and obviously he's a Manning. We understand that. He's got all the tools. He's got all the attributes, but it's hard to play quarterback in this league and have success on a week-in, week-out basis and be consistent. And so I think there's going to be – we'll see how much growing pains there are for Arch Manning, but I think there's going to be none. And, again, he opens up week 1 in Columbus against Ohio State. That'll be a fascinating matchup, obviously. Jim Knowles gone from Ohio State. We'll see what they look like defensively, but you'd imagine they're going to have one of the most best or most talented defenses in the country. So I think what it says is that we just don't know. What we don't know is what we don't know. And, I will say I trust Austin Simmons with Lane Kiffin obviously leading the way and kind of pulling the strings. He's going to put him in a position to be successful, bottom line. And you think over at Texas with Arch Manning and Sark, and I do expect him to have a good year. But, yeah, the quarterback position is going to be
a real possibility for Texas.
Yeah, it is. It is. I mean, I think you look at the schedule upcoming and all the pieces they lost. And, I don't think it's any foregone conclusion that Texas is just going to march right back to Atlanta and go to the SEC title and certainly go, 11-1 again. So I think with all the movement at the quarterback position, Steven, it's going to make, 2024 was a wacky, unpredictable year. I mean, even with some of the veteran quarterbacks we had, there was some inconsistent quarterback play, and I give Jackson Dart a ton of credit. I think he was the best quarterback in the conference in 2024, that he almost kind of flew under the radar because Ole Miss didn't have the season that we were all expecting. But at the end of the day, when you looked around, you were like, I think he's got the highest floor of anybody. I mean, he's been the most consistent, I think, of anybody. And we ranked him number one. Our guy Cole Thompson ranked him number one in his postseason quarterback rankings. I would have done the same. So I think Austin Simmons, is he the best quarterback in the conference going into 2025? It's too early to say that. But, again, I think certainly at minimum he's going to be a top half of the league guy. And, whether it's who's ahead of who, he or Arch, it's just going to depend on what we see on the field.
I got a really hot take I'm about to throw at you. Okay.
Let's hear it.
The reason the SEC looked like they struggled in the playoffs and the bowl game and that narrative happened is because Ole Miss underachieved and didn't make the game. Because Ole Miss, I think, had the best roster and the best team in the SEC last year.
No, I agree with that. We talked about that a lot. We would each Tuesday night, I'm sure you guys did as well, talk about the college football playoff rankings and break it all down. And, we mentioned many times that, and I was, again, honestly, I was a little disappointed to not see Ole Miss in the field because, to your point, I think if there's any SEC team that really could have made a run, would they have beaten that Ohio State team? Heck, I don't know, but really could have made a run. I mean, I think, to your point, Ole Miss was the most talented football team, top to bottom, in the conference this season. It's just unfortunate. Obviously, the Kentucky game happened, and then the Florida game in the Swamp. I mean, LSU losing at Death Valley in overtime, that's not really one that you feel like you should have won that game, but there's really no shame in losing that one. But, it's what could have been. I mean, it's what could have been. I don't want to open an old wound here, but, it's a shame because, again, I think that Ole Miss team – I know that Ole Miss team would have been a lot of fun to watch in the postseason.
Yeah, and I think analytics own a lot of the blame for what happened to Ole Miss. And I think conservative, old-style coaching – that just kicked field goals and all that, Ole Miss might be 12-0 at the end of the regular season. But Lane Kiffin his slot machine fourth down attitude, every one of those games involved not getting a fourth down in a one-score game inside the 20-yard line.
Yeah, I mean, it will be, again, it'll be interesting to see how this team, what did they learn from 2024 and how do they use it in 2025? Because, I mean, I think even with, I know last year was the whole last dance mentality. I think it's still playoff or bust for Ole Miss this year, right? I mean, I think getting to 10 wins is the goal and, dare I say, the expectation. You just got to break through at some point, Yeah,
so they've got the schedule to do it.
Yeah, they do. Yeah, it is. And I think, looking ahead, Steven, I looked at their schedule. I think what helps them is not having 4 straight cupcakes to start the year. Like, you jump into conference play really early. I think you go to Kentucky early, which I'd imagine they're going to be out for blood in that game, getting a little get back against the Cats. But you just, it almost seemed like that first 4-game stretch, like they played a preseason last year, and it was like they got lulled to sleep a little bit. So I think jumping into conference play early, maybe you're not going to get like overinflated about who you are, right? You're able to see some of your warts earlier in the season, and maybe there's a little humility because, I mean, when I look back at the Kentucky game last year, that's the only reason I could see that Ole Miss would have dropped that game, is just coming in with the big head. We can't be beat. Kentucky's not very good. And, I mean, as well as I do, Steven, in this conference, top to bottom, anybody can beat anybody. I mean, we saw it last year with some crazy results with OU beating Alabama and Vanderbilt beating Bama and just all kinds of different results. So I think that's going to help them as well. I think the schedule is conducive for a big year. And, I mean, I think Ole Miss, Steven's going to be a team we're talking about right there. And we're talking about, SEC teams that are kind of on that 9-3, 10-2 cusp. I think Ole Miss is right there yet again.
Yeah, should be pretty interesting. So I know it's 8 months out until football season. What's SEC Unfiltered's plan for this season?
Yeah, really excited, man. We'll be back on the road all 15 weeks of the SEC football season. We don't have the official date set or anything right now. We're traveling around to different basketball venues, baseball as well. Like I mentioned, we'll be in Arlington for opening weekend. We got some other trips planned. We're going to be all over for March Madness, the SEC tournaments for both basketball, baseball, College World Series. So we got a lot to do. But do not fear. We'll be back in Oxford. We'll be back on the square, back at the Grove for the football season again, starting week 1 and doing just like I did last year, Steven. It'll be a little bit bigger and better, and we'll be doing some different things, maybe some live on location stuff. We'll probably be getting in town a little bit earlier. Last year I was getting in town on Friday, leaving on Sunday. We'll probably try to get in town on Wednesday or Thursday. Again, maybe do some live on location stuff, some different content stuff. We'll also have some other staff. So it was just me last year. We'll get our guy Dave Shoemate, Cole Thompson, maybe some others out there, and be shooting video and just taking it all in. I've got the new camera as well. We'll be vlogging the whole thing just like we did last year. And again, it's going to be a lot like last year, but just ramped up a little bit. Our friends over, you mentioned FanDuel, they're actually our lead partners on that. We're really proud to have them on. And so, yeah, we'll be on the road all season long. We'll be at the SEC title game, probably going to hit some playoff games this year. So getting back to Oxford is going to be a major priority for us. And we had a blast last year, man. I mean, I picked a great weekend, obviously, with the Georgia game.
That was the right game to go.
That was the right game to go to. It was a lot of fun, and the people of Oxford were great, man. So can't wait to get back, and should be a lot of fun.
Well, as soon as you know when you're going to head to Oxford, let me know, because on the post-game show that I have, that's about an hour after the game, something I'd like to have you on that just for a little
we'd
bit.
love to do it, man. Yeah, we'd love to do it. Like doing more stuff like that. Like I said, we're gonna it's gonna be similar to last year, but again, we're ramping it up a little bit. So it's gonna be a lot of fun. Like I said, I don't have the schedule pulled up yet. We're just so busy with the basketball, baseball stuff, but I'll start to kind of look ahead, look at the schedules, kind of figure out what would be a good game, what'll be a good matchup, and we stormed 4 fields last year, Steven. Ole Miss was one of those. So I gotta be strategic. I gotta be strategic. Where can we go where they might rush the field? I don't know if we're going to hit 4 field stormings again, but it should be an electric season, man. And like I said, Oxford was one of my favorite trips. Had a great time, and truly can't wait to get back.
Yeah, and I think Diego Pavia against Auburn and Vanderbilt is almost a must-go to. Because
that might be.
It is not too late for Hugh Freeze to get his Father's Day present.
Yeah, that might have to be one we go to. So no, it's always fun, man. I mean, at times it's very, very difficult to determine where we're going, but it'll work itself out. But like I said, Oxford, 110%. If we don't get there too before football season, there's a good chance we go down to Swayze, and I'd love to take in a baseball weekend and take in a beer shower. So we might be down there before them.
Yeah, and it'd be interesting. I think Texas comes to town. That would be a fun matchup because back in, I think it was 2006, Ole Miss played Texas in a super. And Texas ended up eliminating them, and that Texas team won the national title. So it could be kind of like a revenge series or whatever.
Yeah, I've never been to Swayze, so it's and that was last year was my first time ever in Oxford in any capacity. So again, that first experience was one I'll never forget. But yeah, I mean, looking at the schedule, Steven, just looking again way too far ahead. I mean, the LSU game will be electric. Yeah. Obviously, I think the game against South Carolina could be fun. There's kind of this budding Lane Kiffin versus Beamer kind of, I don't know, they butt heads a little bit. The Florida game could be a lot of fun. So there's definitely there's plenty of opportunity. We will get down there and take it in, man. I'll never say no to a weekend at the Grove, man. It's the best tailgate, the best tailgating in the SEC, Oxford, Mississippi, easily.
All right, thank you, Chris, very much, and thanks everybody for watching. See you later.